I know most of these guys, but I know all these guys. I've known all these guys a long time, but I don't want to leave out anything that's important. And so we'll start at the far end with my friend Mark Raffauf. Mark and I have known each other, I don't know, the years, back to the 70s and 80s. Mark joined IMSA in '74 at age 16 and still works the organization today. Taking over IMSA founding president John Bishop, Raffauf served as IMSA president from '89 to '93 and has filled a variety of competition, technical, and administrative positions over the years, including his current role as senior director of race operations. He is based at the IMSA headquarters just across the street from the Daytona International Speedway. And in addition to his long-running IMSA career, he recently co-authored with Mitch Bishop, John Bishop's son, the best-selling book and the definitive book on IMSA 1969 to 1989, which is the inside story on how John Bishop built IMSA into a global motorsports power in just a few short years. This year marked the 50th anniversary season of IMSA. And thanks for making the trip from across the street, Mark. We appreciate that.
The rain almost kept me away.
Yeah, it's Florida. It'll quit in a little bit. Our next guest, Tommy Kendall, TK. TK and I go back to the Firehawk series when I had no pacemaker, black hair, no glasses, and he had acne, and we raced it. We raced against each other in the 80s, and he pretty much always beat. In fact, he always beat me. I only had one lucky time. He made his mark as IMSA's youngest champion in 1986 and 1987 with the GTU titles in the Mazda RX-7. He later won 4 Trans Am championships in 1990, including a run of 11 victories in a row, which I think stands today as the longest run of victories in motorsports. Is that still correct? And he has taken an active interest in HSR and the Classic Daytona, also supporting the Trans Am series, and also racing here this weekend, including hosting the season-ending awards celebration in the Daytona Beach Saturday night. Like Derek Bell, he is a member of the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America, which is located right here at Daytona International Speedway. You get a lot of plugs in here, Adam, for the Daytona International Speedway. Welcome, Tommy. It's great to have you as a guest. And he did admit to me this morning that he is a recent owner and purchaser of a '76 Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham.
Bring a trailer, having breakfast one morning, like 4 minutes left.
He is not the only victim to bring a trailer. The Pontiac I'm driving this weekend, I bought off Bring a Trailer for 15 grand. We've got it drunk with horsepower. And if you look at it, there's a sticker on the back that says, "Our car is cheaper than your tires." Our next guest, a 24-hour Le Mans and Formula One race winner, Jochen has been the featured driver at HSR Classic since the debut event in 2014. He wheels 2 of the oldest cars this weekend in the 300 SL Gullwing Coupes that you see out there, including number 0 entry Mas co-drives. Welcome, Jochen. It wouldn't be the same thing without you. Now, Jochen also starred as himself in the movie Rush, so we'll get more to that later. Our final panelist, 2-time world sports car champion Derek Bell, won 5 24-hour Le Mans races, plus set the race record at 243 miles an hour. Straight.
Not round the lap.
Yeah. I realize that. I mean, it turns. Yeah. Also, he's won 3 Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona, an impressive career that saw him elected to the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America in 2012. He is racing this weekend in the legendary Holbert 1985 number 14 Lowenbrow Porsche 962 HR1 that he drove in his prime life in IMSA Camel GT racing. Derek, it's always a pleasure to have you, and thank you for joining us. I get to relinquish the microphone now to Justin Bell, who is the son of Derek Bell, an accomplished driver in his own right. Justin Bell is better known these days as a motorsports broadcaster who currently co-hosts with none other than TK, Tommy Kendall, the popular online motorsports program, The Torque Show. Justin's most recent wins came in the World Challenge a few years ago, not far from here in St. Petersburg, Florida, and he joins his father as sports car racing champion, where Derek earned back-to-back World Sports Car Championships in 1985 and 1986, and he captured the 1997 FIA GT2 World Championship before winning the 24 Hours of Daytona, 24 Hours of Le Mans G2 class in 1998. And I'm going to hand the microphone over to Justin. Justin, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I just didn't want to sit on the naughty chair in the corner. You remember to pick up the mics. Welcome, everybody. It's special to be here, obviously, seeing not only these amazing drivers, these incredible cars, and it's a throwback to that era when, I think today's IMSA is the new good old days, but when they were the good old days, if you think about it, it was a little different. There were no driver aids really in the cars. You had to do it yourself. Hawaiian Tropic girls could wear crochet bikinis down the pit lane. That was special too. And there was no BOP. So it was a glorious time in sports car history. But that's, I think, why all of us are here today, this weekend. They play such important roles, whether it's Amelia Island with Bale, all the other events we do or coming here. It's so important because seeing these cars out on track is truly what they were meant to be and meant to do. And while we can still have everyone around, it's amazing to put all these guys together. So we really only have one theme, and that is, let's talk about the great days, how cool it was to drive these amazing cars, and really the importance of sports car racing and where we are. I'm going to kick it off with Dad, because he's closest. Microphone. First of all, when you walk into the pit lane and you see the Lowenbrow car like that, would you have thought 30 years ago that you'd have been here today driving it?
Well, two things. First of all, I didn't think I'd be here today at all because I'm getting on in age. But I have to admit, we didn't revere the cars that we raced in that period because we were racing wonderful cars all the time. And if we revered them all, we'd have a wonderful collection at home, wouldn't we, Jochen? But because I remember being offered a Formula One Ferrari when I raced for Mr. Ferrari in Formula One. At the end of my time there, they said, do you want one of our cars? In other words, we got so much crap here, we'd like to get rid of one of our F1 cars. And I thought, what do I want a Formula One Ferrari for, after all? So it never really got into my brain that it'd be a good idea to capture one of these cars and have it at home. So,
well, you did wise up when it came to a 956.
Well, it did. Yes, I did own a 956, yeah, but that was temporary.
It was in our garage. Imagine that. You go to school and you open the door to the garage and there's the rear tail wing of a Rothmans Porsche.
The problem is the tyres would go flat and the bloody thing would be sitting on the rim. So every week you had to pump the tyres up, and when you wanted to start it, you had to get 2 or 3 people to come and sort of get all the pressures right. I was totally, so unresourceful when it came to starting those sort of cars up. But it was a key starter, I must admit. But I did have it for a little while.
Jochen, would you say you were nostalgic about the old days, or you were such a big part of Porsche's and Mercedes history? Do you get more nostalgic as the time goes on and people remind you how amazing it was?
Only when I look at some old pictures of myself, how good looking I was. Yes. No. Funny, the older the pictures, the better you look. Isn't that strange? Anyway, no, but
it's true, you were.
The cars changed dramatically, of course, with the introduction of the 952 or 954 and the 962s. Of course, these cars aerodynamically were far advanced. Of course, they learned their lessons from the 917s and so on. So, and I think the 917-30 was mainly developed really by Penske and, of course, by say it.
Porsche.
No.
Donahue.
Mark Donahue, excuse me. And, they did a fantastic job. And I think the company picked up a lot of points, what they should do and what they could do. And aerodynamic development really then took hold. I mean, the wind tunnels became more and more sophisticated. And that made a big difference, too. And in order to interpret your wind tunnel, you had to work with it for at least a year to understand what's happening and to translate it actually to a car on the racetrack. And this was later in Formula One, of course, amplified and so on. So it's really an interesting development. It was a great time. So nostalgic about these cars, I'm not. I just really like the days when we did it. when we raced them. And the funny one, the first time I drove it was in Le Castellet. I drove the 936. We tested, and then they said, "Okay, Jochen, drive the other one now." So they wheeled it out, and that car had only been running in Weissach a few laps with some engineers there, and so I got into the car and I acquainted myself, with what it looks like and all the instrumentation, which was a little bit different to the 936. But then you leave, and I asked Singer, I said, "Norbert, how will it be?" And he said, "Well, we'll find out." So anyway, then I, past the pits, basically, as you leave the pits, you come to a fast left, right, and then quick S, lots of trees on it, guardrails, of course, and so on. And this was quite a challenging little corner in the 936. You had to focus on it. You could do it flat, but it needs some convincing, every time. And you really had to be pretty precise and so on. So with that car, I drove down and I looked at everything, and I came down to the bottom end of the track, came down up the long straight, 2 kilometers, and then Senior and the double right-hander and so on, and I came back because they said, only one lap and then we check everything. So I came in, and they said, "How's the car?" I said, "I don't know. It's ridiculous." I said, "I think I've been driving on a different circuit, because the S which we see there wasn't there when I drove on it just now." It was amazing. The car was so splendid that you just didn't notice certain corners anymore because you could take them flat easily. So it suddenly was a different track. And it was a really fantastic experience. And, the car was also user-friendly in terms of, it was comfortable inside, had padded seats, right? Mm-hmm. And we could do even the 24 Hours Le Mans, which I didn't drive much, because but for various different reasons. We can talk about it later. But, okay, I give up. No. No, but it was nice. So 2 drivers could do the 24 hours quite easily, which for later cars, it became more and more impossible because the cars were harder and very harsh on your body and so on, and very bumpy and this and that. So you needed to be at least 3. It was very, very physically much more strain on you. But okay, now next question.
That was the first 18 questions, all answered by Jochen. Tommy, you are relatively a modern legend behind the wheel.
Believe it or not.
I can say that. We're like an old married couple now. What is it like when you see these guys? Because they do come from a different era of manliness.
Well, it's weird to be sitting here 30 years on, but I remember when I came here for the first time in '81 to watch my dad's first ever IMSA race. And the radios were a relatively new thing then, so some cars had them, but most didn't, and some of the ones that didn't work, and so the signal pits were really important. And I was like the carrier pigeon between the signal pits and the pit lane, which was a long ways, and they dreaded it. And I said, "You want me to take it? Okay." And they'd give me a note or a question, and I'd run over and ask them this, and I'd run back. And so I grew up idolizing these guys and watching them and going out on all the corners and studying and dreaming of one day getting to race, and then finally getting to race in an RX-7. I remember, and then when the 962s would come past you, I used to think that they have to be superheroes. How can they do that? And only later when you get in there, the limit's the limit in whatever car you're in, and so it's still hard, and the faster and scarier the limit is, the harder it is to get close to it. But I just remember the awe of them coming by you, throwing the big flame in your face. You would actually feel the heat through the windshield. So I have it from a fan, coming up awe perspective, and then you put your head down and you dig, and pretty soon you're in one of those cars and you're running well and winning races and so forth. So I'm really glad that I raced in the era I did. it's different now. It's no harder or easier to outdo everyone else, but it was really cool. We had to, without the data, you had to really think about and try to stitch things together. And so the challenges are different now. There aren't as many mysteries on what's making the car work. It's still hard to gain an advantage, but I feel lucky. And to come here and see these cars running like they should is, it takes me back to the fan part before I ever drove. And so it's really fun.
It was, that's the great thing. If you notice, when you drive in, we didn't think, honestly, I had no clue it was this big an event. And when you drive in, all the VW camper vans are there, the same ones that come for the Rolex. And I mean, some of the people out there are in the same spots that they do come in January. But Mark, you've had an interesting perspective on this journey. And the last time we did this, it was all about the 956, 962. But you've witnessed these gentlemen here as in the steward role, which was, you can't always be the friend to everybody at that point. You've watched the sport evolve all the way through. This is a very chilled out, relaxed weekend. And kudos to the organizers, because it is totally the most relaxed. Jochen's car owner can't believe how relaxed it is here compared to Europe. So everybody's got the right spirit. What's it like for you seeing this journey and now being here at this point in it?
Well, as you mentioned, I was the guy that had the opportunity to race direct all these guys and many others, and that was an era where IMSA attracted certainly probably the best sports car pilots in the world. I had the opportunity to watch Tommy start, win a championship in a street stock car and a GTU car in the same year, driving two completely different kinds of cars, go all the way up into the prototypes and be able to run with these guys. And for me, there's two things I want to say, being on not the driving side, is the cars are spectacular. And the way these guys drove them made it look easy when you looked outside, to the point where some of them were just spectacular to watch by themselves. They didn't have to be racing anybody. They just had to be driving on a section of road, and you would watch what they would do with this car and just shake your head and say, wow, that was so cool to see. And the other thing I have to say about the drivers, not one of these guys ever got yelled at by me, ever, that I can remember. And that's a statement not only to the quality of the people, not that drivers today aren't that way, but the cars were special. They had to be managed by the driver as much. There was no aids. You had to take care of the gearbox. You had to take care of the brakes. You had to drive the car, and to succeed, you had to do a lot of other things at the same time. And at whatever level, because you didn't have all this electronics, you didn't have this BOP, you didn't have all this stuff that you have today. So it was probably never as pure as it was maybe in 1955, but certainly in our lifespan, it was as pure as it could be, with the fastest, coolest cars on the planet. And having these kind of people demonstrate what they could do was super special. So to see them come back today, two things. One, partially some of them are iconic. I mean, Derek's Lowenbrow car is iconic because Derek and Al drove it and the way they drove it. And I think the fans that saw that know that. Those that don't can see that, seeing it on the racetrack today, because Derek's here driving that car. I wish Jochen was here with one of Bruce's cars. And you had a Spicer and a Intrepid to go play with too. So that's my view. It's super cool to see the cars. It's a fantastic event. Like you said, it's relaxed, but it's also very special to have the people that are here.
Can I just say something? I think we must realize what it was like for us working with them, with Mark, because we knew he was like up there in the box looking down and checking that we all did the right things. But he had this amazing, or they all did, this wonderful attitude of saying, oh, let's have a chat with him, or let's do this, let's do that, or even ask us questions maybe about safety and what we thought about certain issues. And they were part of our team as we were part of theirs. Whereas invariably at certain places around the world, they sit in a god box and you never see them in their ties and jackets, and you never see them until suddenly you get a penalty for something and you can't discuss it. So IMSA came up early with Justin, was the fact that it was a much more friendly atmosphere. And of course, Jochen and I had raced in Europe intensely for the World Championship for many, many years. He'd done Formula One, 200 Grand Prix, I think. And then raced with us with the Porsche team, and then then suddenly America opened up, and there was a possibility to come here. Thank God that IMSA basically ended up having similar rules to the World Championship. We could use similar cars, or the same cars really, And of course, that gave us the chance to come over here and race. And of course, as we all suddenly found out, and you can talk to guys even like his teammate, who's probably older than me, and he sort of looks at it for his first trip over here with a race car, and he goes, it's so pleasant out there. It's such a lovely atmosphere. And that's what makes it. Because when that flag drops, as we say, the bullshit stops, and off we go, and we have an incredible race, and we try not to have too much animosity or too much one-on-one with bashing around. And I don't think Mark ever had to tell us not to hit one another. We damn well knew we shouldn't hit one another. But nowadays, it seems to be that you've got to hit people to get by and to make silly moves. So I think what IMSA did and created and started was the beginning of the greatest sports car era, certainly.
I'll also say that these guys and the guys of that era, when they had something to say, as Derek implied, we would always listen because they were part of the process. They were part of how we managed our show, the Camel GT at the time, and they were the integral part of it. So we had a really good environment that is not, I'm not saying today is bad, but it's not the same. You know, George Silberman's out there, he was there. Jim Roller made all the TV shows for us. So we had the opportunity to be in an era with people that everybody had respect for one another, and the end result showed it, no question.
Isn't it wonderful? It just shows that good cars make better drivers. And they really enhance characters, and it is wonderful. And in a way, it's true, actually. I'm not even joking. And, you know, cars which are highly difficult and dangerous and this and that, of course, you create, or you end up living on a different tension all the time. So you're more focused on what could happen and what you must avoid and things like that. So you're much less relaxed and so on. So I really have to take my hat off, in the years 50 and 60. You know, I mean, you were part of that later in the 60s. 60s.
You're saying the 50s?
60s.
Jesus.
I was a little young.
No, I was swaying from 50 to the 60s. Remember that?
I remember
You
watching
don't want to hear what
Jochen,
I'm saying. I know, but anyway. And so
one of the things that I wish you guys, I mean, that's the point of these forum seminars, is to sort of get this insight and hear what they have to say. But a lot of the times in my life, I've been fortunate enough, they'll start talking about something like Jackie Ickx at the Hotel de France. He's not a big talker in public about his racing, but he'll start talking about stuff, and you're like, where's my camera? Where's my microphone? You know, I wish I could reveal this. And then you realize it's an inner circle, but as they get older, they do share more. As you can see, if they could remember more, it would be more entertaining. But
we actually forgot what we said before. That's why.
Yeah. That's why they wear suits with their name on so big. But Dad, you were talking about, I'd like this from all three of you guys, talk about that moment when you came here to test, the first time you ever came in the Speedway, because that's an impactful moment.
Yeah, that I can happily say was almost before Mark came here. It was 1971, and I was driving for the Porsche team. It was my second World Championship race. My third sports car race of my life, and I was in the Porsche Works team in a 917. And Joseph was my teammate. Pedro Rodriguez drove in the other car with Jackie Oliver for John Wire in the orange Gulf cars. And we came here from winning Buenos Aires, which was for me to win my first race, a bit of a surprise. We came here sort of pretty pumped up. And I never forget, we came, and obviously, you walk in. I've never been around a banking in my life before, and I walk in. There is not a soul here. And so I saw the track sort of like from a standing position, vertical position. And then that night, having not driven back in the hotel, in the morning, John Wire was typical of John Wire. It wasn't like today when they say all be at the track at 8 o'clock, because that's when we sort of open the doors and you sit around and wait and feel important. In this case, John would say, he said, don't worry to come in till 10 o'clock, Derek, that'll be fine. But Joe will do the first practice. Now, it was just a day for us. And so at 9:30, I drove through the tunnel, and it's the most amazing place, and probably very few of you have done it. Mark, I'm sure, has done. But you drive through, there's no trucks here, there's nothing, there's no people, an empty, deserted oval. And I was like totally in awe just looking at it. And I knew that Joe should be out on the track at some point. So I came up through the tunnel and waited at the first junction to the right there and thought, well, where's the action? And then suddenly, of course, there was no chicane then down the back straight. and the loop in the middle was slightly different. And I remember, but I didn't know the track, so I just remember this roar and the echoing sound of the flat 12 air-cooled 917 engine start up. And I heard it obviously going down the road. I didn't know where it was going or anything about the layout of the track, really. And he came around and he came down the back straightaway, out of turn 2, flat out all the way, and flat through turn 3 and 4 at 215 miles an hour. And it was absolutely unbelievable in this little thing made of plastic. And he went around, as he went around the bank, and there was none of this. The car was actually like that at an angle as it went around. And he was holding the car down, and the back was sort of sliding up there the whole time, and you just held the front down all the way around the banking, off the banking and past the pits. And I went, oh my God, have I got to take that corner flat? Because to me, if anything isn't straight, it's a good time to slow down. But in this case, there was this massive bank, and I go, I've got to get into that flat. Anyway, ultimately, I didn't. And I don't think I ever took it flat the whole time. I had major sinus problems, and then in the race, Joe blew the engine up, or the engine blew up. So we did well. We were running first or second, inevitably. But that was about it. But that was my first experience. But what a place. And it still is. It still fills me with awe when I come and see it.
What about you, Jochen? What was your car and your first experience of Daytona?
Oh, that goes back a little bit to 1972. Many of you weren't born, no? But
Actually, I can guarantee most of them were.
No, but it was nice because I had an invitation to run the inaugural race of the Super V, which was the introduction of Super V to the States. So I had raced half a year in 71 with it, and then I switched to Formula 3. So I was really also, I was leading the European Championship, which was nice, and then Ford had bought me Formula 3, so I drove in the UK. But anyway, coming back to here, 72, my engine blew immediately, so that was it. And then the other one was stuck somewhere in Tampa at the airport, and we couldn't find it. And then I found it on Saturday night, I think it was Saturday, and they said, yeah, you can drive tomorrow, but you have to be last on the grid, 60 cars. I said, yeah, sure. Anyway, so then you follow, after the start, you follow the pace car, and the pace car pulls in late into the pits. Normally we go, the whole field jumps ahead, but we were already flat out behind you guys, with the pace car, so we couldn't go quicker. But anyway, and then to the infield, and I stayed on top, and I went past all these cars, and I said, why are they all slowing down so much? I overtook 54 cars, so that was my first, what I remember.
But they hadn't come to the start.
54 cars, I finished fourth in the race.
Had they started the race then?
Yeah, they had started the race, yes.
Started the race. I thought you'd overtaken them on the pace lap, Jochen, and because that's what did happen to me. But I did notice before I got past the 54.
I know. Every time I passed you, you hadn't noticed.
What about you, Tommy? I mean, obviously, can you imagine if they'd allowed you to do Trans Am around here? What a bun fest that would have been. But
Well, I told you my first time coming as a spectator, but when I first drove, it was 86 in the RX-7. And all the other tracks, when you come, they feel about the same, but the size and the scale and the scope of it is just different here. And then also the fact that it's for the 24 hours. I never did the short race mid-year, end of the year. By the time I was driving, it was just the 24. And so every time you were on track here, it was once a year, and there was so much at stake, and it was the kickoff of the season. And I'm glad I got to drive the lower classes, but it's a whole different experience when you're in a car with 330 horsepower and you're in your own race. You're trying to go as fast as you can, and these guys are coming by. So, a little bit terrified, and that never totally changes. I mean, I think that's one era we didn't think about the danger overtly. You kind of blocked it out, but today I don't think they think about the danger because it's just not as dangerous. They're blocking some out, but they don't have to block near as much out. And so, there was sort of a heaviness where there was a tension that always existed when you were driving the fast cars. And it was kind of, that was the pleasure was trying to get yourself to move through that and closer to the edge and trying to figure out how to go faster and also keep yourself around. So it was, but this place was different than all the others. And you see that. I've never had obviously the European perspective, but it was clear the teams that would make the effort to come here and still make the effort to come here for this race, that it's on the world stage, it's a big deal.
Now, how many people are driving this weekend who's in it? I mean, quite a lot of us. It is still, it's special no matter what car you're in when you're out there on the banking, isn't it? It doesn't matter if you're in the middle or the bottom or the top of the banking. It is a special thing. And I'm glad everybody here, that's the great thing about this event, gets the chance to feel it. I always think when I'm up on the banking, can you imagine what it's like in a NASCAR around here, 3 wide? And we're just like in a sports car clinging on, but I can't even imagine that.
Yeah, but that's the wrong way of, definitely the wrong way to look at the track. Walk around, and you can hardly walk on it.
That, yeah.
But what was this 908s when they all flipped, 2 of them, because they had the long tails, things like that, and they were very unstable. And I wasn't there, but I remember the pictures vividly in our motorsport magazines at home and so on. But were you here at the time?
No, I wasn't. No, I didn't start.
You did your own upside down.
I did my own upside down here, and Mark remembers that.
Anyone see that? Anyone remember that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember it quite well, actually. But no, going back to the 908, I have to admit that those, I never say anything against Porsche, but some of those long tails were a bit dodgy, weren't they? I drove the 917 long tail testing last year, and I couldn't sleep, thinking I was going to drive it at the Le Mans Classic. And eventually I wrote to the owner, Willie Cowson, the long tail that used to do 240 odd, although it was the actual previous model, but still the long tail, and it was undrivable. It was just undrivable. And I told Willie, I said, I can't drive.
It didn't help that the car, the former original driver had died in the car.
Yeah, and I walked down, and there it was sitting there in white 40 years later with the guy, John Wolfe, racing on the side, and I went, we don't do that. Drivers don't walk into dead man's shoes, and that put me off quite a lot. And then I tested the car with Norbert Singer, which was wonderful, but we couldn't get the car right. And the whole time it was unstable. That back just kept, and they never got enough air onto the back of the car to stabilize it, which is probably what happens to what Jochen's talking about. And eventually I just wrote a letter to Willie and said, I just can't drive this. I'm sorry. I can't put my wife through the fact that when she asks me what I'm going to be doing at the Le Mans Classic, and I say driving a 972s, and I'll say, well, it was a kid that got killed at Le Mans in his first lap, and she would throw me out the house. And I just couldn't live for 3 months with that in my mind the whole way through. And the incredible thing was, they never really tested it, although I gave them all the feedback. And they went to Le Mans, and a young lad, whose dad is a very important man in racing, had obviously paid for him to be in this car, and he went out on the first lap and he crashed a mile further on than John Wolfe had. And he braked, as he went into the chicane, the car went left, right, straight in the wall, knocked all the wheels off. Now, he didn't get hurt, thank goodness, because of the safety factors of our tracks nowadays. But it just shows you that, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, and it really was.
But that's exactly the problem, what I mentioned earlier. We didn't know enough about aerodynamics and the effects of this or that. So they all fished and they learned and so on. And then when the 936 was a pretty good car, but of course then... it
was a lovely car.
Yeah, sure. Then 954, we won a few races. Yes, that's right. I'm glad you mentioned.
We won Le Mans in it. Well, you and I didn't. Jackie, you won it though, didn't you?
No, it was close, but not quite, yeah.
What do you mean you were second?
I came second.
Well, we're in the same
we
team.
Came
you must
second
have
for a good reason.
It was, Bill brought it up earlier. Now, we're going to get into the movie business discussion at the moment. Obviously, Ford versus Ferrari, or they're just calling it 1966 Le Mans. Le Mans 66 is how they're promoting it in Europe. But Jochen has quite a funny story about when he was actually playing himself in the movie Rush. What happened? Did the wardrobe lady didn't quite believe you, did you?
No, I was worried you would go back to the mid-60s, but I was luckily then in the Merchant Navy. No, but anyway. So for the film Rush, they reproduced all the costumes, all our overalls of those days. And the girl who looked after them, so she gave it out and she said, so what's your name, sir? I said, Jochen Maas. She said, yes, I know, sir, but what's your real name? She said, there's this Methuselah still driving. She said, but you're old. I said, yeah, but obviously I'm older than you, but I'm still driving. So I was my own comparse. It was pretty good.
That's fine. Do you have makeup? Who's seen Ford versus Ferrari at any of the previews? I know your dad has. Who's excited for it? I think it's going to be what do you think? I think it's going to be good. Dad, what do you think? You're the only one that's seen it. My perspective, just before, is that
told you
anything
mine,
that's
so you know.
good
Sorry.
to promote the world that we love so much. We had Dad had his Porsche driving school back a long time ago, and there was we had these 2 fighter pilots come on to the school, a couple of guys, and it was the same time that Days of Thunder was out. And these 2 guys are there, and there's a reason for this story. These 2 guys are saying, God, did you watch Days of Thunder? And we're like, oh, yeah, I mean, you know, who's going to be at Talladega and like downshift when the crew chief, you know, at the top of the banking? It just didn't make sense. And they laughed, and they said, yeah, but it was so cool. And I'm like, and then they looked at me and they said, have you watched Top Gun yet? And I was like, oh, the best movie ever made. And they went, you don't put the flaps on at Mach 2. You know what I mean? You don't. So I was like, but it was so flipping, I didn't swear, flipping cool. I was warned not to swear. You know what I mean? So it's really not for us as much as for bringing people in. Do you think it'll do that, Dad?
Yeah, I think it's worth seeing. I went to the premiere in Paris about 4 weeks ago. I went and was lucky enough to go on the red carpet with Matt Damon and Christian Bale. And it was fabulous, a fabulous evening. And who else was there? Joseph. What's his name? LaRousse was there, Pescarolo, and Tom Christensen. So we had a lovely evening, and the ACO of Le Mans, they organized it. So we had a lovely evening, saw the premiere. And I must admit, the first half an hour to 40 minutes of the movie, I was absolutely enthralled by it because I didn't know the story. Now, Americans might know the story better, and I'm sure Bill does, better than you need to know it. But it was a very interesting story of how they got, you know, how the program came about, and Ford wanted to beat Ferrari. And it was really interesting watching it, and I really enjoyed it. And then, of course, they get to some of the racing scenes, and nobody has ever quite captured car racing scenes when the drivers are going down the Mulsanne straight, looking at each other and going, "Oh, I'll get you off at the next corner." And as you rightly say, you suddenly see the driver going down Mulsanne, and he hits the gas pedal to floor it and go a bit. Oh, shit, sorry,
just my camera, Dad.
You're like
Sorry,
it.
thanks.
And he flattens it on the brake, on the gas pedal, and you go, it would already be on the pedal, flat to the floor. And then simultaneously he hits the brakes and downshifts. And you're going, downshift at that speed? You wouldn't downshift at 190 miles an hour. Those sort of things you will see, and all of you are such enthusiastic people about driving, you will be critical of it and go, I'm not sure about this. But the overall story and having 2 great actors in it makes it, and I think it's well worth seeing. But I think the purists will find it a little bit sort of, oh dear, another movie. But the story's good, and I think it's worth seeing.
What about you, Tommy? Because you and I spend a lot of time with the talk show, trying to get younger generation involved in what we love so much, and I think we all agree in here that there's 2 people in here under 25, I can see. So, you know, and that kind of unfortunately sums up our world at the moment. What do you think about a movie like this, other than the fact that you and I weren't cast?
Well, there's a good reason we weren't cast. If you see Alex Gurney playing his dad, when Alex Gurney and John Fogerty used to drive together, I thought I was looking at Dan Gurney and Sterling Moss. It was the most uncanny thing I'd ever seen. So to see him cast as his dad, I thought was super cool. On the thing you're talking about, I get both sides of it. When I go to a car racing movie, I try to forget what I know and get drawn into the story, because the reality is you need to make it that matches what people's perceptions think it is, to draw them into the story. So I'm really looking forward to it. I've heard good things. Any good movie about what we do, I think, just helps for sure.
And it is one of those things that is very topical. It brings in with next year, it's the 50th anniversary next year of the Le Mans movie. And when you look back now, Jochen, when you look at like Grand Prix, I watched it about a month ago at home, and then you watch Le Mans movie, their car scenes were actually incredible, considering the camera was the size of that table. What do you think about motorsport? It's always been entertainment. Should we, the way racing's going, should we continue to focus as much as racing as being an entertainment form?
It's difficult to ask a race driver for that because, we live it.
Yeah.
We sit in it, we drive it all the time, and when you look at the film, you look at it too critical, and you're a little bit, of course, taken aback by certain actions, which you think, bollocks, couldn't have never happened like that, things like this. But, it's for the world and so on. So it's, Yeah, I accept it and so on, but it's not that I'm overly fond. But Le Mans was a fantastic film. Le Mans was a wonderful film at the time. I mean, even Grand Prix, it was a great film and so on, because the characters were fantastic. And I really liked it. And, I met what's his name? Frankenheimer. Frankenheimer, yeah. And he was a heck of a nice guy. He walked around in Hockenheim, actually, in the paddock, because he thought about making another race film and so on. And but Bernie didn't really want to come up with some financing. Not surprising. And so it didn't happen. But race films are very difficult to make them exciting. Now we had this Rush film, which was good. Ron Howard did a fantastic job there. I remember when he came in the mornings, first time he filmed digital, he said. He usually had always normal celluloid rolls and so on, and then he could never see immediately what he had done. So that was quite intriguing. And he said, now digital is fantastic. So he said, he came to the track and he said, I think it was Snetterton. He said, where are we today? Are we Nürburgring or are we Fuji? I said, By the looks of it, it was sort of semi-dry. I said, it looks more like Fuji. He said, well, we make it look like Nürburgring, and they flooded it, and so on with big tankers, and so on. So there was, what you can do, and of course all the buildings in the back and the crowd. This is all electronics, beautifully done. So, but the film to me made sense because Hunt was my teammate and Nicky was not my teammate but mate anyway, and so on. So I lived this period again, and especially with this unfortunate event of not winning the Grand Prix finally in Germany. That was a bit of a letdown, but you can't bitch about it if somebody gets injured so badly, like Nicky, and so on. So Chris Hemsworth called me up months earlier, and he said, well, what was he like, James Hunt? So I told him as much as I could tell him, and so on. And he was glad that we had spoken for an hour, about that, because it made some sense to him. Because it's difficult to fathom a character of somebody who is sort of so over-enhanced on the one side in the press and so unknown on the other end. Yeah. So it's really weird. And what was he really like? And of course, I knew what he was really like. Yeah. So I knew him from the 3 days. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Quite a character.
Well, we have before we let everyone go, we have anyone have a couple of questions or one question? Yeah.
If Bale and Damon, in doing the movie, do they now want to go to a driving school? Do they come up?
According to Ellen, they do. Who? I saw Ellen on the Ellen show yesterday.
I don't believe what Ellen said.
I think he's like, I want to go driving. He actually
said right in front of us at that night, he just said, we don't know the first thing about cars. That night at the world premiere. Pardon? Well, I wouldn't say it didn't by the end of it, but of course, you didn't get a chance to talk to them afterwards. We talked before, and he said, we really know nothing about cars. They're not our thing.
Makes you realize they really are actors. It's like they really aren't special agents either.
It makes you appreciate what they did much better, because they actually, I thought, did a heck of a job. I mean, Christian Bale, I think, is one of the best actors in the world right now. And the way he put it, a bit extreme, and he puts over the part a little bit extreme-wise, but that's what the character was. I never knew him, and I don't think any of us probably in this room, Bill might have known him, but, I didn't even know he was English until they talked about making the film. So. Yeah.
Anyone else? Question? Yep.
The Corvette Challenge. I did actually a handful of races. Didn't run the full season. It was a spec series, which these they were street cars with cages and upgraded brakes and so forth. And they had a couple house cars, and so that's how they ran. I think Johnny Rutherford ran the one. I ended up running that dealer's car for the better part of the year. It was $100,000 to win the championship in 1988. And so that's why it attracted a lot of top talent. Where were you? I actually missed the drivers' meeting. It ran at the Riverside Raceway Cup race, and I was doing one of my first NASCAR races. And the rule was if you missed the drivers' meeting, you had to start last. And so the race was in the middle of the drivers' meeting, and so I saw the schedule. I went to Les Richter beforehand and said, "Hey, Coach, I think I'd done one other race the year before, and And I said, hey, I'm going to, at the driver's meeting, and I have this race. I just wanted to come tell you so that I don't, get penalized and have to. He says, well, I appreciate you coming. Just on the second pace lap, just pull out a line and just go to the back. I said, no. I said, that's why I'm here. I'm here to tell you I can't be at the driver's meeting. He said, I know, I appreciate that. But the rule is if you're not at the driver's meeting, you have to start last. I said, I have a contract. He goes, well, you got a choice to make. And I was like, and I gained so much appreciation for how NASCAR did things then. It wasn't personal because he liked me, but he said, this is the rule. And in road racing, you'd go and you'd say, hey, can I like with Trans Am or what, I've got to do this. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah. And you realize that leads to some other things where they're malleable in some ways. And so you would argue and debate. Anyways, so that was Corvette Challenge, a little tangent.
What
there.
did you tell the bank manager? Because that would have been the difficult one, right?
Well, I had to drive the Corvette, and so on the second pace lap, I pulled out and dropped to the back of the pack.
Wow. Well, a big round of applause to Mark, Tommy, Jochen, and Derek.